And good afternoon, everyone. This is Ryan Miller with North Carolina Building Performance Association, welcoming you to today's webinar. We will be talking about an awful lot of very interesting design concepts today with our guest presenter, Maddie from CaraGreen. So we'll be hearing from her in just a little bit. Before we get started, I will kick it off with just a couple of introductory remarks and clarify some of the logistics for today's webinar. For folks that are either here with us today live, it's March 25th, 2020, or listening in later on the recording. So first off, we just want to say thanks to everybody that is joining us live or listening in later on. NCBPA is happy to provide these types of webinars and educational events to our members and industry companies, no matter how and when that happens. And given all of our current circumstances right now with educational events and remote working and things like that, we felt this was very important. So we have lots of webinars that are scheduled on our website now. You can find those at buildingnc.org/events, and we will have many more posted in the coming weeks. As I mentioned, this webinar will be recorded, so we will be making this available to our members and also to all registrants later on. So if you're interested in watching that video or other videos that we have of our recordings, please do look for that email and then check our website as well. So just a quick mention about NCBPA. We are the state's trade association for building performance companies and professionals. We cover all types of energy efficient, green, and high performance construction and work with our member companies, including CaraGreen, one of our members, to help educate and advocate and move our industry and its workforce forward. So we're very happy to have all of our members represented in some form or fashion in all of the work that we do. So today's webinar will be on biophilic design, and we'll be hearing a lot more about that here very soon. We will be putting everybody on mute for the duration of the webinar. So that is to eliminate any background noise from barking dogs or slamming car doors or folks having lunch, which you are welcome to do if you've not done so already, or listening in later on, of course. So we will be taking questions, though, in the chat box. And so in your GoToMeeting console, you should see a little message button towards the top, and we welcome your questions as we go about. I'll be moderating those and then providing those to our presenter so that she can answer those questions as we go along. And then we'll be opening up our phone line kind of at the end to see if there's any questions that people would like to speak to our presenter about. So without any further ado, Maddie, I think that I will kick it over to you and say thanks very much for offering your time to us and also for being a member in great standing with NCBPA. You guys have always done wonderful work. We're happy to be working with you. And if you don't mind, a quick introduction and we'll get started with today's webinar. So Maddie, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Hi, everybody. This is Maddie. I am the Sales Enablement at CaraGreen Healthy Building Materials, and I'll get into who we are a little bit. But at CaraGreen with Sales Enablement, I work kind of as a liaison between marketing and sales, so helping to provide the right tools to help enable our sales to grow and be able to tailor everything with what's going on in the industry and make sure that we are delivering the best education and tools for you all. So I'll go ahead and jump into the presentation here. Make sure that it goes next. There we go. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, CaraGreen, like I said, is a healthy building materials company. So we're continuously providing and supplying the best emerging materials out there on the green products marketplace. Basically, our job is to simplify the product selection for you all and also serve as a resource for education and information. So we do various presentations like this one today. My colleague Rob will be doing a presentation later on with NCBPA. But our overall mission is to increase building sustainability, create healthier living spaces, and reduce the overall amount of carbon through better choices of materials. So we are registered with AIA, and I believe there will be credits given for today. So as Ryan mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about biophilic design. I'm sure you've heard of biophilic design now. It's a big trend out there. But we're going to be going through what it is exactly, look at how biophilic design can impact the interior environment, how businesses can benefit from biophilic design, and how you guys can consider which product options best contribute to the design itself. So the term biophilia means being attracted to all that is alive and vital. This was first described by Erich Fromm, but it didn't really get popular until the biophilia hypothesis in 1984, where it was described as the instinctive bond between human beings and other living systems. Edward O. Wilson popularized this hypothesis in his book, go figure, called Biophilia, where he described it as the urge to affiliate with other forms of life. So it's good to talk about our biology before we get into the design itself. This better connects why it's important to us. So we have billions of neurons in our brain that is connected to our nervous system. Our nervous system is comprised of the parasympathetic and sympathetic system. So the parasympathetic relaxes the body and handles things like digestion, and sympathetic stimulates the body when cognitive functions are needed. And that ideal state in between is homeostasis, where the ideal state, these two things are in balance with each other. So how does nature impact us? Well, when we're under stress, the sympathetic system takes over and can result in energy loss and fatigue, something I'm sure that we're all experiencing nowadays. But nature helps to stimulate the parasympathetic system and relax and calm us, helping to decrease stress and irritability. And this is due to the natural fractal patterns found in nature. So any of those repeating patterns that you see out in nature, they actually create something called Moore receptors, which is a natural opioid in our visual cortex. And talking about stress and well-being, mental health and cardiovascular disease are expected to be the two contributors to illnesses worldwide by actually this year. When I first started giving this presentation, it was a few years away, so it wasn't as daunting. But sorry to be doom and gloom, but looking at mental health facts, 1 in 5 American adults experience a mental health issue, 1 in 10 young people experience a period of major depression, and 1 in 25 Americans live with some sort of serious mental illness. And then on the other side, cardiovascular disease, roughly 610,000 people die of heart disease in the US every year, so it's 1 in every 4 deaths. And about 735,000 Americans have a heart attack. So sorry to be doom and gloom, but let's take a walk. So a 20-minute walk through the forest has been shown to increase our parasympathetic activity by 56%, lower stress levels, decrease our heart rate, and lower overall blood pressure. And this is not a new idea. There's something called shonen yoku, which is a Japanese noun meaning a visit to the forest for relaxation, literally translated into forest bathing. And there was a study that was done in Japan that showed that these restorative walks helped diabetic patients by lowering their blood glucose by 40% on average. This is actually twice as effective as walking on the treadmill for the same amount of time. So how did we get here? How did these scary statistics come about? We really can see this with the evolution of our behavior. So back to even since the Industrial Revolution, we've been increasing our time spent inside. I think we're up to about 93% of our time is spent indoors. And technology is a big part of this. We spend our days in front of screens when we're in our offices. You go home to another screen. We're always immersed in our technology. So the solution is to spend more time outdoors, but in situations like nowadays, it's not always an option. And in our typical lifestyle before all this coronavirus, we were spending our time in the office space and not able to get outside as much as we would like to. So the best solution is bringing the outdoors in by using biophilic design. So what is it? So it's actually, I feel like it's usually greenwash. Nobody truly understands it. It's actually very basic. It's comprised of 3 pillars: nature in the space, nature of the space, and natural analogs. Looking at nature in the space, this is your most direct implementation. You're integrating plants, animals, water features, views of nature. And as you can see on the example images, we even have a live tree in this office space, the beautiful water feature. And even with me right now, my desk looks like the ones at the bottom too. I have some plants in front of me just to make me a little bit happier from how much time I have to spend inside lately. Looking at nature of the space. So this is in regards to spatial orientation and objects or areas. So as humans, we inherently prefer what's called the savanna environment. And I always like to describe this as, like, think of the Lion King, and you can think of the lion. Oops, sorry about that. Come here. Sorry. I know Ryan said, be careful with the barking dog, and of course I'm the one with the barking dog. So humans, going back to this, inherently prefer, Kobe. Sorry guys, one moment.
And Maddie, take your time. This is definitely one of those opportunities where we're always flexible with how we're educating and presenting with each other. And in these modern times, I'm sure a lot of people live and listening in later on are also at their home. So not a problem at all.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I got it taken care of. I appreciate everybody's patience. Of course, this is a new experience, you know, making sure our work is done in our own homes. But thank you. All right, so he's done barking. So going back to this, think of lion on top of Pride Rock, where the lion has the option of seeing the vast land in front of it and seeing any opportunity that it can go after, but also being aware of any danger coming its way. And no, we're not lions, but we do have the similar you know, want for something that we have this ideal view that is wide, but we can be in a protective position. So that's where a lot of open concepts come from, as well as in our own homes, a lot of, you know, these larger windows, like in the example on the right. Natural analogs is the final pillar. So this is looking at design elements that evoke a sense of nature. So these are organic forms and shapes of art, different biomorphic forms, natural materials, depictions of art, and even materials that demonstrate environmental stewardship, something like a lead or a well plaque can all have that effect. So looking at your tools, so what tools do you have for biophilic design? There are actually 14 patterns or tools that you can use, and I'm going to briefly go over each of these. So under nature in the space, our first tool is visual connection with nature. So this provides an object to focus on, which helps to relax your eye muscles, prevent any cognitive fatigue. So I love the example on the right with this beautiful green wall going up the staircase, but also all the daylighting and the windows on the right as well. If my desk was positioned near this, you know, I have the option of looking up at this green wall or out the window. And there's actually something, at this time I usually ask if anybody is familiar with the 20-20-20 rule, but since you're all not in front of me, I'm just gonna go ahead and describe it. So actually every 20 minutes, you should spend 20 seconds looking up from what you're focusing on at something greater than 20 feet away. And we're more willing to do this when there is a natural scene in front of us versus something unnatural. So your non-visual connection with nature is your second tool. This is providing a sensory connection to nature through your different senses. So things like gardens, digital simulations of sound, water features, pumped-in smells, of course, something relaxing that, if you can remember walking into an Abercrombie and Fitch, nothing like that. You know, those are always horrible smells, but something to calm you down. Then non-rhythmic sensory. So this is a sporadic, sometimes seasonal, non-visual stimuli to periodically attract attention and reduce stress. So I love this image on the right. You can think of any high-rise building, but when I used to work in the DC area, I worked in a WeWork that was in Crystal City, and the WeWork was on the 11th and 12th floor, which were the top floors. And every day as I rounded the corner from the elevator, I was introduced to these windows, just like in this image, and I could see the Arlington neighborhood in front of us, and each day it was something different to walk into, you know, the trees changing or the weather was different, and it always made coming into work a little bit more relaxing instead of, you know, typically seeing the same thing every day. Thermal and airflow variability, so allowing occupants of a space to have control over the climate. Studies show that a static, unvarying climate can lead to boredom and productivity loss. So looking at different things like HVAC setups, window glazings and openings, and temperature controls. Presence of water. We know this has been well studied throughout time. It's proven to have a calming effect on us, both physically and psychologically, reducing stress. People go to the beach for, you know, vacation for a reason. Some people fall asleep to the sound of rain, all because it has that restorative effect on us. So you can incorporate, obviously not all of us can go to the beach every day. If you're near a beach, I'm jealous, but I'm up in Buffalo, so we don't have any beaches near us. But having water features, fountains, or aquariums all can have the same effect. Dynamic and diffused light, so creating a positive response due to the production of serotonin. Serotonin, obviously, it helps to create positive psychological responses and enhance performance and alertness. So having lights to stimulate daylight. Of course, you all have studied throughout time looking at distribution plans for your building layout, and of course, increasing the amount of sun during parts of the day and blocking it in other parts. And then lighting control. So, you know, depending on the time of the day, what kind of lighting best promotes alertness and creativity and productive, you know, behaviors. This is the last tool under our first pillar, so it's my favorite, connection with natural systems. So connecting an individual with a natural ecosystem in a way that helps them understand their connection to nature. So ideally, you're doing something that's interactive. So looking at constructed habitats for animals or insects, where you can see pollination occurring throughout the year and just the changes with both of those and seeing the development of things. So keeping the humans connected with what's going on outside. And then rainwater recapturing. I think this is a very easy one to implement outside a lot of buildings, where you can see how that rainwater can actually help with the landscaping outside the building. Then under nature of the space, so your first tool is the prospect. So going back to that Savannah experience, this is where one can be aware of danger or opportunity from a vantage point. So we create those vantage points by having wall partition heights less than 42 inches, glass partitions, open layouts, which we know are very common, elevated platforms in areas, and optimal focal lengths greater than 20 feet. So kind of tying back to that 20-20-20 rule that I mentioned earlier, this is a great way to do that as well. Refuge is the other side. So we don't always continuously want to be in the hustle and bustle of our office spaces or whatever industry throughout the entire day. So offering a protective sheltering space for the individual can have a calming and stress-reducing effect on them. So you can use cubicle areas, even overhead trellises, acoustic panels, meditation rooms, and booth seating, all to create that sense of protection and creating a balance throughout the day. This one I also like. So this is mystery. So encouraging exploration and invoking cognitive interest by partially revealing and hiding areas. So like I said, creating a very sense of intrigue. So I love this image on the right with the acoustic screen hanging there, partially revealing what may be an office space or a conference room. Each time you may walk by that, you'd be curious to see what's around the corner. You know, you're kind of breaking apart the natural flow of the day when you get used to these certain patterns of walking around the same spaces each day. So creating obscure edging and pathways and creative artwork, all to kind of break the mold. This also fits into what I was just talking about, so risk and peril, so increasing interest and curiosity, encouraging problem-solving skills and memory skills. So glass stairs, balconies, infinity edges. My favorite, and I don't know who put this in there, but we keep it because it's just kind of funny, photos of dangerous animals and experiences, all things that really make you consider your how you occupy the space and how you observe the space, and you know, really taking in your surroundings around you. So natural analogs, so these are those biomorphic forms. So anything that's organic in nature and evokes a sense of nature. They've been shown to create a positive response. So, you know, different shaped woodworking, tree or other nature shapes made from different materials. Using the Fibonacci series within the carpeting or wall patterns. And as you guys know, it's inherently aesthetically pleasing to humans, just like the natural fractal patterns found in nature. So that's the connection there. Furniture design, sculptures, acoustic panels or walls. And I'm going to show you some images on what that would look like in the space. So these are some natural analogs, the acoustic baffles that have a cloud formation, the carpeting in the middle that looks like a mix of grass and moss, and then our 3D trees on the right made from different solid surface materials. And these materials too, you know, have a composition that evoke the nature. So the wood walls or woodworking that have a similar appearance that you can find in nature. So, you know, of course, we all don't have a budget like Google, but we can do different things in a smaller scale. So I like showing these images. It's actually something from our partners where we've utilized different, you know, materials that are organic in their appearance in a way that you look at it and you feel connected to nature. So complexity and order. This is using symmetrical design techniques to create a visually pleasing experience. So different material textures, wall and flooring patterns, building facade patterns like we see on the left, where we see the order of the continuous windows on the building facade, but then it's broken up by these asymmetrical steel beams, not beams, but steel structures. So there are measurable benefits from using biophilic design, but we like to talk about quickly how these concepts have been misconstrued. People usually see these as a costly way to create the best workplace environment, or just an expensive design technique to showcase environmental stewardship. However, there have been hundreds of studies that have been done to show how biophilic design can be incredibly profitable, and not just in the office setting, but also schools. Right now, especially looking at hospitals, helping to have quicker recoveries, increased concentration of your staff, less medication use, in retail, and then even some neighborhood designs have utilized biophilic design to lessen crime and violence in their areas. So where we used to spend a lot of our time, I always say where we spend a lot of our time, but right now we're in our home offices, looking at daylighting solutions. So yes, they've helped to stimulate serotonin, inhibit any melatonin that occurs through the day, but also has helped to lower energy costs. But in doing so, all of this helps to increase productivity in the workplace. And by the way, any numbers that you do see, I have all the references linked at the end. So I know Ryan will have a PDF to share. So if you're interested in reading more, note that we do have all of the case studies linked here. So going back to productivity in the workplace, so looking at about $2,000 per employee per year, that's the increase in productivity of using something like daylighting. So looking at if you had 15 employees, at that increase in productivity, you're increasing about $2,000 per employee. You can in the end have $30,000 in annual savings. So where do we invest? Invest in technology or your employee productivity. Technology becomes obsolete and requires reinvestment. You know, Apple likes to throw a new phone at us every year, and our phones that are not the most updated have little bugs and for some reason crash. So that always requires reinvestment. but employee productivity returns are greater and continuous. So we have this consideration at the bottom here, looking at productivity costs in the workplace. They're actually 112 times the energy cost. So salary is 90.3% of the overall workplace total. So that's us. That's how we are, you know, how quickly we're picking up calls or making sales or creating designs throughout the day. Versus looking at rent and mortgage and energy, these are much lower percentages. So we really should be focusing on our productivity and our people in the space itself. So lost productivity results in bad mood, lack of focus, poor health. People aren't coming into the workspace and being productive like they should. So we'll go into a couple of case studies here that kind of show this. So looking at the University of Oregon, they were looking at the absence rate in their existing office space. So this is the breakdown. A third had offices facing natural views, a third street view, and a third with an interior-only view. 10% of their absenteeism was caused by lack of views of nature. Sacramento call centers is a very similar case study, but they did something about it. So some employees had views of nature, others didn't. They were looking at the rate of how quickly calls were picked up. They were 6 to 7% quicker with employees who did have those natural views. So they decided to reconfigure the space, and it cost about $1,000 per employee to give everyone a view of nature. But it did result in this $3,000 in increased productivity per employee. So they recouped their investment in only 4 months. ING Bank in Amsterdam, it looks like a rocket ship or a soccer cleat. I love hearing what people have to say it looks like. It is very in your face, but it was designed with daylighting, organic art, and water features to incorporate biophilic design. One to help absenteeism drop, and also looking at reducing their energy costs. But it also in turn became the second most popular bank in the Netherlands. And I think this is a really cool bank to go to. If I had access to this, I would go. I can think about my typical bank, and I kind of grumble wanting to go in there. Another bank close to me in New York, but this bank in Bryant Park, the Bank of America, provided natural views for 90% of all of its offices. This is actually designed specifically to attract talent out of school or from competing banks, all to bring in, productivity and revenue. But as you can see here, of course, there's Bryant Park right below the building, but in the building itself, they have these beautiful overhead trellises, the woodwork on the ceiling, daylighting solutions. But I also want to point out where there's kind of the Savannah experience with the protection behind the glass of seeing what's going out on the street, but say there's any kind of accident or something where you need to retreat inside, you have that option to do so. So in healthcare, I usually kind of gloss over this because there's only, so many people who really invest in healthcare, but I really like to go over it because we're all clearly affected by healthcare in the U.S. And there's currently is $3 trillion per year spent in the U.S. on healthcare, $300 billion on prescription drug medication, $40 billion on construction by 2010 statistic. But looking at different case studies using biophilic design, we've seen decreased costs in patient care, improved medical outcomes, increased alertness, and less medication usage. So I want to point out, this is similar to our office case study. So we're looking at a hospital and where the rooms were positioned. So half had 46% more daylight than the others, and they were measuring the opioid use of patients in both sets of rooms. Perception of pain was actually less in those rooms with more daylighting, and they used less medication, actually by 22% less in those rooms with more daylighting. And I'm just going to pause. Ryan, I know you asked me if there's anything you guys have questions about in the comments. I'm not sure if there's anything yet, but I'll pause and let you check.
Sure. Thanks, Maddie. We'll let you take a sip of water or something as well. You are obviously very, very knowledgeable about this. I'm finding it fascinating myself. There's a lot of science in this, actually. So, yeah, as Maddie mentioned, we're happy to take questions in the chat box for folks that are joining us live here. And then, of course, if anybody's listening to this later on, we'll have Maddie's contact information available, so you can always get in touch. But Maddie, maybe just kind of one question from me that I've been thinking about is, and maybe just the short version of this, of course, because I know this is probably a whole topic itself, but how do you all sort of see people first getting interested in this? Is this sort of a topic that, you know, the architect would bring to, you know, the customer and say, hey, here's something I think we should want, or with all the, you know, great numbers and studies and things like that that you presented, is it where, you know, the customer is saying, well, this is definitely a priority for us? Is there just kind of a general theme there, or how do you all sort of see this happening?
Sure. From my experience working within the Andean community, it's usually the customer first approaching, especially if they're very, say if they're interested in LEED and WELL, that's a very big commitment. So usually the owner and customers have to be well invested in that this is something they truly believe in, or especially if they're changing their mission to, you know, fit something you know, that they need to adjust to within the world, and especially considering a lot of business now are considering how climate change will affect them, or just their overall approach in their employees and wanting to invest more in their employees. This is usually something that I know is an ask. And then I also know on the other end, there are a lot of firms out there that this is a core aspect of what they try to promote. That they always want to incorporate in their design. It's not, you know, it's not a certification. This is just a practice. And it's always, everybody is always invested in understanding what occupants of their space need. So it's kind of 50-50 in my mind. And it's always best when the two are on board with each other. I very rarely see any other, I mean, I see always, every time, every firm I talk to, this is always a core mission. To, you know, invest in their customer and make sure that the building itself is not only energy efficient, but accommodating to the people. And I think that's kind of something that we're shifting into within the industry as well. We're invested in health and transparency and making sure everybody is, you know, being provided what exactly that they need. And truthfully, in this kind of time period, I think we're kind of taking a step back now that we have to, you know, be in our homes and seeing what we really value, and incorporating a lot of our values into the space and how we can make those spaces healthy and the best fit for what we need out of them. So that was kind of my little elevator pitch for you, but if that answers your question.
It definitely does. That sounds great. One of the things that you said that stood out to me was, you know, this does not have to be a certification, you know, but this is sort of a style, you know, and a commitment, like you said. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I don't see that we have any questions. So, Maddie, if you want to go ahead, we'll continue.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Ryan. So also in the hospital settings, we can look at healing gardens. You know, healing gardens have proven benefits for patients, but also our staff, to help increase alertness of our nursing staff and our doctors, because of course we want them to be as alert and aware of being able to take care of us in the right way, in the proper way. And then looking overall, patients with views of nature or having access to these gardens had an 8.5% shorter hospital stay. So quickly bringing up those numbers again, 3,972,000,000,000, 300 billion, crazy numbers. And then pulling from our case studies here was an 8.5% reduction in length of stay and 22% reduction in medication usage. We can see these numbers drop about $2,000 savings per patient and 66 billion in savings on prescription drug spending. So Big Pharma hates this, but we like our people to not depend on medication as much as they do currently. So I love this image. This is a great image of how biophilic design is used in a hospital setting. And truthfully, when I first saw this picture, I didn't think it was a hospital. It's not what I typically envision for a hospital. Until you see the doors at the very end, that gave a clear indication, okay, it's a medical facility. But looking at all these beautiful ample daylighting, the views outside, solid surface trees, so incorporating that natural analog, creating a sense of mystery with the winding organic path of seeing where it goes. Of course, the color choices are very natural and remind you of nature. So in retail, this is a $3.9 trillion market. On average, consumers are spending $13,000 in retail shops per year. Consumers will perceive a location more valuable when Biophilic design is used in the space. They'll spend 20% more on food and 25% more on goods. This is an industry that I used to work in, so I'm pretty passionate about how Biophilic design is used. I used to work for the Urban Ink Company, and I worked in the anthropology stores, worked in 4 different locations, each including all biophilic elements, both for the purpose of increasing sales and keeping people in the space longer, but also to help promote a healthy workspace environment for its employees and keep employees. Retail can be very tricky to keep employees around. This was always a space that I was comfortable in, and it felt like it was tailored to its employees as well. In education, it's a $661 trillion market in the US. Students are increasingly being kept indoors, but when they're asked to draw their favorite photo, about 96% drew one in nature. So the question is, why are we keeping them inside more? And looking at daylighting, we see 3 to 4% higher attendance, and several studies linked to Biophilic design showed 5 to 26% improvement on their test scores, overall better behavior, and higher achievement levels. Looking at a case study, so the cost of an absent student per day is about $25, and the absent teacher is $105. So if you think about maybe one student missing school once every week, it really starts to add up, and the same with teachers, of course. But when incorporating things like nature-based learning programs, either on-site or off-site, students did better than their peers 72% of the time, but it also helps to improve attendance. So those students, those students typically, was 77% better as well. This is one I really like, especially being from Western New York. Looking at Cornell University at their Olin Library, they incorporated this temporary grass installation inside the university's main library to help the students during their exam week, to help give them a place to relax. If you're from the area or familiar with a snowy city, it can be quite depressing. So help them to remind them of warm summer days and lawn rather than the cold air in the winter. It's also to help them reduce stress. It is a very stressful environment and a high amount of mental health issues in that part of the state. So this has helped to reduce a bigger problem as well. So the data in Biophilic design is a sound economic investment, a smart social investment, a smart health investment, and a responsible environmental investment. So that's the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to open up to any other questions, if anybody has any at this time.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Maddie. Tons of great information there, and we appreciate you going through all of this. So, yep, we'll open up the chat box and just see if anybody wants to provide some questions while we're sort of wrapping things up here. So, Maddie, I guess maybe one question from me, because I'm learning about this as well on you know, this topic and kind of how building performance and building science and everything kind of comes in. As far as you know, folks that maybe want to learn more about this, I know it's probably a big topic, and of course we'll push them to reach out to you directly. Is there any other just kind of general advice that you have for folks to find information on, YouTube videos or case studies? Is some of that available just through CaraGreen? What are maybe some other avenues to receive some information on this topic?
Sure. If you're working on, there are so many more case studies than I touched on within this presentation. I'm sure you could find something in reference to the type of project that you are working on. I know with the development and the usage of well out in the building industry too, biophilic design is a core element of the well building standard as well. So you can look at a lot of different well projects to get inspiration. At CaraGreen, we also have a podcast and a blog where we address a lot of different aspects of biophilic design and the different elements in depth. So you can go to caragreen.com and be able to access more information. We also touch on a lot of industry issues within the realms of, looking at the recycling industry and how different materials can reduce the amount going into incineration facilities and landfills, and silicosis we talk so much about as well, and different things within the course industry. So we do address a lot of environmental health problems as well as, encouraging sustainability. So we are a great resource for you guys, and especially if you do have a project in mind that you would like some help finding some references, or if we've worked on something like that before, we're always willing to discuss it with you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. I feel like I could have a whole bunch of questions for the rest of the day. I've got at least one more. So, of course, the folks that we're presenting to and messaging to with NCBPA are both on the residential and commercial side. So could you maybe talk a little bit just about, what you think are the opportunities for sort of residential versus commercial? Is there sort of a different way of, kind of back to my first question, how folks kind of get interested in the topic, or maybe how, what they're physically capable of doing if you've got, sort of a smaller space versus a larger space in a commercial building? Just any kind of core differences there?
Yeah, so it's interesting you asked that, because I feel like that's it's always been a main focus for us right now, especially looking at how all of this behavior starts in the home. And we are trying to adapt a lot of our commercial spaces to reflect what we do inside our homes too. So the comfort of our homes and the access to certain things that we have in our house and how that reflects into commercial spaces. So, in other presentations that we have, we focus a lot on different residential aspects of looking at how even surfacing has changed over time, and to be more accommodated to our own lifestyles, and reducing amount of bacteria that remains on surfaces, or even materials that help break down carbon dioxide in the air and things of that nature. So, going back to biophilic design, it's something that I know a lot of residential homeowners are very passionate about incorporating all this greenery and just having your access to daylighting and different things. I think we're realizing how important are in our homes, especially now that most of us are, stuck in our homes. And something that I valued as somebody who works from home on a daily basis, is just incorporating these elements in smaller ways. And I think you can do that with your homeowner. There are a lot of case studies within and how that's done in the home too. So it's not just one. The thing I love about biophilic design is it's not limited to the commercial setting. It can be incorporated in any different way, in all different applications. Does that answer your question a little bit?
It does, and again, it's one of those things that I'm sure we could spend a whole hour just talking about those kinds of differences. So maybe we'll save that one for another time. So,
sure.
Okay. Well, I don't see any messages in the chat box here, which usually indicates that you've done a wonderful job presenting, Maddie. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I'll offer just a couple of kind of wrap-up comments here, and then Maddie, I'll kick it back over to you just for anything else. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, you know, we always make most of our webinars are free through NCBPA. We do have some coming up on HVAC that will have a small fee, but we always provide discounts to our members, of course. So those are always either free or deeply discounted for our members. So please do look at the NCBPA events calendar at buildingnc.org/events for all of our upcoming webinars. There may have been some added while Maddie was talking by our staff somewhere. So we'll have more coming up in the future. And as she mentioned, her colleague, Rob Hacker, will be presenting on waste as a resource next week. And so we'll be looking forward to that one as well. And this will, of course, be recorded and added to our growing collection on our website. So we'll make sure to send out Maddie's contact info. She's got some of the social here on the screen. We'll make sure everybody gets that access, and then also a PDF of the presentation as well, and be able to ask Maddie questions. So I think that's kind of it from the NCBPA perspective. Maddie, any other just kind of closing comments or recommendations for folks?
I mean, I'm just appreciative of everybody's time. I know that I'm so thankful for having platforms like this where we can continue our education, even though that we're not in front of everybody. It's something that we're very passionate about over at CaraGreen. Like I mentioned, just want to plug in our podcast and blog again. We're still throwing out so much good content and valuable information throughout this time. So I know that, you know, things are still crazy, but we want to make sure that, you know, we're staying on top of everything that is important for you all. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me with any questions, or if you have any desire to talk about the products listed on our presentation on our website. And then there's always info@CaraGreen, and any question is always directed to the correct person. We are based in Raleigh, North Carolina, so if you haven't already, I do encourage you, when we are allowed to get out of our homes, go visit our showroom in the Raleigh area.
Great. Well, thank you, Maddie, so much for sharing all this wonderful information with us. That will conclude today's webinar, so be on the lookout for more information. And we at NCBPA hope that everybody has a good rest of your day, good rest of your week, and whenever you're listening later on, hope that things are going well for you. So thanks again, Maddie. Thanks to CaraGreen, and we will talk to everybody again in the near future.
Thank you so much.